So here's a bit of Meta's lore. I grew up with game theory and film theory before my come up on YouTube. So I am a little bit of a big theory head in a lot of things I like, whether that be video games, film, manga, comics, tabletop role-playing games, all of it. But there's one thing I've never done here on this channel, or at least in bulk. JoJo theories. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure has existed as a franchise for nearly 40 years. And with that age comes a lot of fan theories that develop over time. So when I asked you guys for your theories so I can rank them, because I thought that would be fun, the sheer amount I got was genuinely pretty crazy. And I think definitely after this video, looking at the comment section, there's probably going to be even more. So simply, the video will be this. I'll be picking and choosing a lot of the ones I like. I'll be ranking them from true to wrong, with some headcanon somewhere in the middle. On top of that, as a special surprise, I also got Hamon in this video and asked him for a personal theory of his. So if you're interested, stay tuned. And please do put your theories down below. If I do end up making a second batch of ranking your JoJo theories, I'd love to pull from this video's comment section. But I'll only do that if this video does well, so make sure it does well if you want that. Well, with that all being said, hello, my name is Metas. Walk with me. So we'll do a really easy one first that I saw on both my Twitter and my YouTube post. Is Star Platinum Jonathan Joestar? A classic theory that I've already debunked in the past. However, I'd like to shine a little kernel of truth over it, as I feel like it would be disingenuous to say the entirety of the theory is wrong. So this theory stems from the idea that sometime during Phantom Blood's original run, Jonathan Joestar said to Dio that he would haunt him even in death as a ghost or a phantom. Eventually, that would evolve into Jonathan being Star Platinum, and Star Platinum and Jotaro Kujo would end up defeating Dio in part 3, therefore proving Jonathan's claim. But that is false information and just straight up doesn't exist within Phantom Blood. There is no statement whatsoever in that part stating that Jonathan would haunt Dio if he ever were to fall in battle, let alone become a Stan. That just doesn't make any sense under how Stan science or Stan logic works. Stans are the personification of the user itself. What you'd be arguing there is Jonathan somehow reincarnates into Jotaro, which, yeah, there's literally no way. They have like none of the same personality quirks outside upholding justice. But there is a little bit of a kernel of truth here. Stans are based around the idea of Shintoism in their original concept, and one major concept within Shintoism is the idea of Musubi, which literally translates to the tying of bonds. Shintoism as a religious practice works on the idea of ancestors and how they help you in the current physical plane of existence, while they work in the Yukai, the invisible realm. Now that's just a small part of what Shintoism is, but why this is important is that Araki uses this kind of in the basis of how Stans work and how the JoJo universe actually works, as it also kind of works for the idea of gravity and fate binding people together. So what I'm trying to say here is this, is that Jonathan is not Star Platinum, but Jonathan is still helping his family even though he's dead, at least in a supernatural way of looking at it. And technically speaking, it's just not Jonathan, it's technically both Georges, Arena, maybe even Danny if you want to take it that far. Basically, any Joestar who's died is helping the alive Joestars in the current present if they ever needed help. So while the theory Star Platinum is Jonathan Joestar is wrong, the idea that Jonathan Joestar and the rest of the dead Joestars that we know of are probably helping the main cast, at least in some spiritual way, thanks to Araki basing a lot of the ideas off of Shintoism for his universe, is true. So this next one comes from Mira over on Twitter, and they say, I'm pulling this out of my ass, but if the Stand Arrow virus originates from space and Mikitaka is an alien, perhaps the Stand virus is native to the planet, and that's why Mikitaka has his abilities. Okay, Mira, you're bringing up like an ancient ass theory. So the idea that Mikitaka and the Stand virus are connected is basically as old as Part 4 and Part 5 itself, from the original run of JoJo's back in Weekly Shonen Jump. It is very strange that the supposed alien, yes, we still don't know if he is an alien or not, and the meteor that crash landed from space, which has a mysterious virus that pulls out the hidden potential of a person, allowing a stand to be controlled by its user, is very suspicious. I think the grander idea here when people are trying to explain this is that Mikitaka is an alien who comes from a species of alien who has already became infected by the the stand arrow virus, or the virus in general, that allows him to use his powers. And while that makes sense on paper, the problem is, like I said previously, Mikitaka has not been confirmed to be an alien, and the problem with the stand arrow virus is that we don't know in specific if the virus brings stands from outer space onto Earth, or the other idea, which I'm part of, is that surviving the virus, regardless of its origin, allows you to control your deeper psychic will, regardless of it being a space virus. Where I ultimately place this theory is in the category of headcanon. It boldly assumes that Mikitaka is an alien when it's left up to be pretty ambiguous and up to the viewer's interpretation Mikitaka comes from, and that the arrow virus is truly alien in origin. It might not be. However, I ultimately can't deny it either or say it's wrong, given the fact that it bases it off of the viewer's interpretation with a non-concrete answer. I can't say it's truly wrong definitively. So like I said, the best thing I can give it is a headcanon category, given the info around it. However, if true, does spark a lot of grander questions for the JoJo universe and how it does operate. And our next one did appear in both comment sections yet again, and does correlate with the SBR anime and manga. The theory being, Sandman and Soundman are two different people. The theory goes as the following. Sandman, the one that we saw at the beginning of the manga, uses a completely different power and is referred to as Sandman by his tribespeople multiple times, and his sister as well. While Soundman, on the other hand, uses a completely different power, agrees to work with a white man rather than just buying his land like he originally supposed, and just feels a lot more different than his original counterpart, showing a much more hostile part of his personality that just wasn't there beforehand, and is so off-putting that it just doesn't make sense that this is the original character that Araki debuted in the beginning of part 7. And what makes this even juicier is that this Sandman, that is called Soundman, first appears by traveling through one of D4C's interdimensional / alternative universe portals, teaming up with Diego to defeat Johnny and Gyro during the In a Silent Way arc. So when you stack up all the character differences, or rather should I say character changes, on top of the ability known for bringing alternative universe counterparts of many different characters into the mainline SPR continuity or timeline or base universe, led many people to believe that these two counterparts or these two people were different and were not some major retcon, possibly being Araki's greatest show not tell moment. And if it wasn't for the SBR anime, I would ultimately say that this fan theory was true for a time. However, the SBR anime argues that it might be Soundman and there never really was a Sandman. That's because the SBR anime changes a lot of the beginning of the SBR manga involving Sandman. One of the bigger pieces of evidence here is that Sandman does not use his sand stand when entering the race like he originally did in the manga. He just kind of shows off the giant emerald and is entered into the race with no stand involved. So this theory kind of hangs in the balance. Is it true or is it wrong? Thanks to the rewriting and restructuring of the SBR anime. We'll find out with time. However, if you want to know a lot more about this theory and a lot of the deeper connections, I highly recommend the video here by Nettle, who did a great job covering this theory. I personally hope it's true. I really do like the idea of there being two different Sandmen, which leads to great foreshadowing of how Funny Valentine's ability does work. So our next one comes from @lolnice__, and he says, okay, my theory is that most stands give animals a near human level intelligence, or at least a greater increased level intelligence, like Iggy, Pet Shop, Foo Fighters, Strength, and of course the two rats from Morio. So to further explain this theory, if an animal is stabbed with a stand arrow or is given a stand ability in Foo Fighters' case, said animal will be given a greater increase to their intelligence because of the stand. Now sadly, I do have to say that this theory is ultimately wrong. That's mainly due to the fact that we don't know the actual intelligence of all these animals before gaining a stand. If anything, the animals that Araki does use here are all actually incredibly intelligent to begin with. Dogs and trained falcons are some of the most intelligent animals in the world, given the fact that they can do highly specialized tasks on their master's will. In another case, orangutans and rats have been shown to use tools and problem solve puzzles in labs before. And I won't necessarily count Foo Fighters here, given the fact that her intelligence is given to her thanks to a wholly different stand under very specialized conditions. The only only animal that could fit in this theory is maybe Stray Cat. However, that one's weird given the fact that first off, Stray Cat becomes a ghost that infects a plant and fuses with it, then being able to use its stand ability a little bit later on after that. So it becomes much harder to call whether or not gaining a stand in Stray Cat's case makes it smarter. While this theory itself is probably wrong, I do think it asks a different interesting question by proxy. In order to become a stand user, do you need to have a certain level of intelligence in order to manifest one? Swinging back to Foo Fighters real quick might ultimately prove that idea correct. Poochie not only needs to actually place a stand disc inside of her, but a memory disc as well, implying to at least some degree that a stand user must have some type of intelligence backing up their psychic phenomenon that is their stand power. And that's the only example I have in that case, involving a single-celled organism. The other one is Sugar Mountain, but that one requires failures of its test to explain its test to people, as the tree cannot talk itself. Yes, the tree of Sugar Mountain is in reality the stand user. But people might argue whether or not trees are sentient or not, or plants are sentient or not. So that one just kind of gets really crazy and in the mud to answer a fictional JoJo's question. Because a lot of scientists go at each other's throats arguing whether plants are sentient or not, as you can find evidence for both. So while ultimately the original theory here, stands give animals a higher level of intelligence, is most definitely wrong, the idea by proxy of an intelligence requirement for animals to gain a stand is probably true, but would need more examples / statements from Araki himself. Our next theory comes from Jusati. I have this fun theory that Vanilla Ice's stand cream is also the manifestation of not only Cream's spirit, but also proves that there exists some kind of void or empty space that is just hidden from our reality or is not accessible by any other means. This theory is true. Point blank, period. Not only does Vanilla Ice, Cream's user, state that there is literally a dimension inside of Cream's mouth, but multiple of the guidebooks also describe this dimension as a void of space, with Araki also saying it comes from the idea of nothingness and infinity. However, it is not the only dimension that exists within JoJo's. Apparently, Alujo's Man in the Mirror and its ability to send things into the mirror world have at least some connection to this so-called realm of death that is only told about within its stand stats, and is the only being to our knowledge who can interact with objects in relation to the realm of death. Another one might be the spirit realm that Yoshikage Kira experiences in Dead Man's Questions. Ghosts can only interact with other ghosts. However, this ghost realm or spiritual realm takes place in our physical reality as well. However, nobody except other ghosts can see it or experience it, unless specific circumstances, like Remy, can interact with the world of the living. On top of that, characters also hint towards the idea of there being a hell and possibly even a heaven dimension as well, somewhere out there. However, that's only ever in passing and is never fully elaborated on, mostly coming from Part 4 and Dead Man's Questions. So going back to Jusadai's original theory, yes, the void space or void dimension exists among a plethora of others in JoJo's. However, they're just not fully elaborated on for one reason or another, or they're so connected with a stand that they can't be fully elaborated on in an individual fight within JoJo's, but they definitely are there. And our next theory is a pretty big one on both sides of the community. Chariot Requiem was bringing the arrow to Jotaro Kujo after Polnareff lost control of Chariot Requiem. Where this theory stems from is Polnareff's last moments in his physical body were thinking of the Stardust Crusaders, while being killed by Diavolo, at least physically speaking. And later within that fight, Polnareff says that Chariot Requiem is going off of Polnareff's last commands as its stand user with the sole objective of protecting the arrow, but has gone completely berserk, treating nothing as an ally except the arrow itself, as it wanders somewhere. But because of that wandering and the previous images of the Crusaders before the physical death of Polnareff, because of that, many people believe that Chariot Requiem is trying to find Jotaro, the only person, at least within that moment, that could save everybody. Thankfully though, Giorno was able to fill in that role a little bit later on. And that's the entirety of the theory. Now, where I would place this on my list is sadly probably in the headcanon category, and that's for two reasons. Number one, Polnareff really likes to state to the audience and Giorno's group that the stand has gone berserk, and while it's following a command from his previous physical body, it's not acting correctly, and is deeming everybody an enemy for the second time, by the way, rather than Diavolo in specific. My second point is where Requiem, the concept, comes from. Now, if you don't know, the idea of Requiem comes from Mozart's Requiem, who would have figured, and the legend goes that Mozart was commissioned by a mysterious man in black for a specific piece. However, Mozart was never able to finish it, and we never figure out who this mysterious man in black was even after the death of Mozart. That all to say, the idea that Requiem presents in the story of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Golden Wind is a mystery. The whole point of it is that we'll never figure it out, whether that be Gold Experience Requiem or Chariot Requiem. There will always be some type of layer of mystery when it comes to either of these stands. That's kind of the whole point. Funny enough, because of that, it's the reason why this theory exists in headcanon territory. It's trying to answer what the mystery of both these stands, and in specific here with Chariot Requiem, is trying to answer. What the hell is it actually trying to do? And while I think the logistic basis of this theory does make sense, it's the concept of Requiem that will always stop it. We will never get an official answer in the story or from Araki of what these two stands are doing, and in specific, like I said, where Chariot Requiem is wandering off to. And our next theory is also Requiem based, coming from Mayor Immortal over on YouTube. And he says, the infinite death loop isn't literal. It's a juiced up version of Gold Experience's life punches that mess with perception. To further elaborate here, the idea is this. Originally, Gold Experience, when fighting Bruno Bucciolati, is when he punches Bruno, Bruno has an out of body experience while fighting Giorno, thinking much faster than his body can actually move, giving Giorno the opportunity to mess Bruno up thanks to Bruno's out of body experience. In comparison to Diavolo and the infinite death loop, it is very, very similar. Diavolo has no control of his actions other than maybe a few body movements. He can't summon King Crimson, as constant death events keep happening to him as he's never able to escape. Very similar to Bruno up until the contact of Giorno punching Bruno. So the idea of the life punches evolving into the death loop thanks to the Requiem boost, aka the ability to dominate over living souls, does make a bit of sense. The problem is that we don't see Diavolo's body like we do with Bruno's. So the best ranking I can give this theory is headcanon, no different than the previous one involving Chariot Requiem. And if we do look at Chariot Requiem here, none of his abilities are upgraded, but of course we do have the argument saying that technically it is a Berserk stand and not fully evolved given its nature. So it's really hard to tell here. There's a lot of info you have to go through here and use a lot of headcanon to prove that this theory is right. And just like Chariot Requiem, this will probably never be answered given the fact that it is a Requiem. It is left up to technically Giorno's interpretation on what Gold Experience Requiem is doing to Diavolo, as he's the only one who can really explain this to us. And Giorno just says he's dead, kind of implying the fact that this might be a wholly different thing. So we're in this area of the theory potentially being headcanon / being wrong, given some contradictory evidence and Giorno's conclusion at the end of his fight with Diavolo. So I did promise this at the beginning of the video. Let's talk about Hamon-Beat's personal theory here. And it simply goes as the following. I think Dr. Ferdinand is a rock human. That's all he says. It's very blunt. Asking him to elaborate further, Beat says this. He has an advanced knowledge of the Devil's Palm, and rock humans are said to have connections to the blessings from Earth. He says that dinosaurs were wiped out because they didn't respect the Earth. So it's very Urban Gorilla-esque to me. And for the ones who don't know, Urban Gorilla is a rock human from part 8 of JoJolion, who says some very similar things about land like Dr. Ferdinand. To further elaborate on that point, JoJolion also tells us about how rock humans are very connected to the Earth, and seek special places that give rock humans special powers, making them their true homes. Beat continues, mammals have surpassed dinosaurs through some unknown means, a calamity, a curse, that type of thing, kind of like the Higashikata curse. We don't know where it came from, it just exists as a long-term aberration, kind of like the carbon and silicon evolutionary split. So rock humans want to take the place of humans, and the blessings of the earth are key to that. Hamon-Beat then goes on a personal note to explain this. The Devil's Palm and walleyes have always been significant, at least to him, thinking that Araki's going for some type of Gaia type thing. And in part 9, the volcano is the origin of that, or at least that's what he thinks. So respecting the earth seems like it could be respecting the powers of the mechanisms like the lava rock, among the other JoJo MacGuffins. If you didn't know, Araki has also stated in an author interview before that JoJo has always been a series that respects the earth. All the MacGuffins are rock based, if you didn't notice. So looping back around, is Dr. Ferdinand a rock human? Answer, yeah, probably. Outside of official confirmation, Dr. Ferdinand knows way too much about the Devil Palm reasonably and uses dialogue too similar to a rock human that once you notice it, you have to question it. On top of that, Dr. Ferdinand uses the same tactics as the Lokakaka organization, teaming up with humans in order to gain further power in these special places. I think outside of official confirmation from Araki, I do believe, like Hamambi, that this is true. But it's not only just Dr. Ferdinand, it could be so many people retroactively, thanks to Part 8, looking back on Part 7, and even currently within Part 9. Anybody who wants special land in the SBR universe, raise an eyebrow at them. They could be a rock human. And we'll end off the video with a personal theory of mine. What's up with all the different versions of Rohan? Now, what do I mean by this? Catching up to speed, there are two mainline Rohans, the Rohan from Part 4 and the Rohan from Part 9. Asterix, maybe. I hope you're following. It's gonna get a little bit weird here. Then we look at the spoke Rohan Kishibe. In this very popular Rohan side story, we get Part 4 Rohan, quote unquote, in the beginning. However, as the side story eventually evolves with time and with Araki, it seems like Rohan from Part 4 appears in the pre and post Stone Ocean reset, looking at specific details given in the story. However, sometime in the spoke Rohan Kishibe, it seems like the post Part 6 Rohan, aka Part 4 Rohan, gets swapped out with a different Part 9 Rohan. The only reason why we know this is because Part 9 Rohan and the later half of the spoke Rohan Kishibe Rohan shares the same dog, ultimately meaning that they are probably connected. So if you consider the spoke Rohan Kishibe to be canon, some point during that publication run, unknown to us because the chapters are mixed up for artistic reasons, means that Rohan gets swapped out for an alternative universe counterpart. However, if you do not consider it canon, that means we have 4 different Rohans. The mainline Rohans, then the spoke Rohan Kishibe Rohan post Part 6, technically just being an alternative version of Part 4 Rohan, and then an alternative universe version of Part 9 Rohan, meaning at max there are 4 Rohans right here. But if you want to get spicy, Rohan at the Louvre and Rohan at Gucci act completely differently and use different powers associated with Heaven's Door that do not correlate with the mainline Rohans or the spoke Rohan Kishibe Rohan, meaning at maximum there are 6 different Rohans within JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, and at minimum at least 4. So why are there so many different versions of Rohan? I can't believe I'm saying this, but there is an official statement about why there's so many different Rohans. And if it's true, breaks the long established rule that the SBR universe would never meet the original universe, potentially meaning that they could collide if Araki wanted to. According to Araki's editor, Satoshi, Araki jokingly considered Rohan appearing in JoJolion, mentioning that Rohan's ability to keep up the time acceleration in Part 6 means that he could exist beyond time and space. Funny enough, Araki said in 2013 that Rohan would never appear in JoJolion, which is technically true, and that a different mangaka would appear. That is not true, as Rohan appears in Part 9, quite literally exactly the same as his the spoke Rohan Kishibe counterpart. Now mind you, I've been separating them. It's not technically actually confirmed whether or not Part 4 Rohan and Part 9 Rohan are different. I'm just assuming that, meaning that Araki's comment might be true. So there might not be 6 different Rohans, or maybe even 4 Rohans. They're all the same Rohan, and Rohan has the ability to transcend time and space. What the fuck? This is our first, and I hopefully think only undefined theory in this video, and potentially series, given the fact that even Araki doesn't give us a straight answer. Is there only one Rohan or multiple Rohans? We may never truly know. Well, with that all being said, like, comment, share, subscribe, follow me over on Patreon, stay hydrated, and I will see you in the next one, ladies and gentlemen. Deuces.